Mist rose from the peat bogs, coiling in serpentine ribbons around ancient standing stones. Villagers clung to craggy hillsides, their thatched roofs battered by wind and rain in a land older than memory. In one such village, a woman named Elise was born under an eclipsed moon. While villagers prayed to their many gods that night for health and harvest, many whispered that the girl's birth under such an omen meant her destiny was intertwined with forces beyond mortal ken. Elise grew into a quiet child, her eyes dark and shining with curiosity. Her mother claimed the girl had inherited a gift from unknown ancestors, visions that came at dawn, unbidden and intense, filled with colour and sound. None could doubt her power. By the time she reached her 13th year, word spread among the neighbouring clans that Elise could foretell both blessings and calamities. If there was sickness, she saw it in her sleep. If a storm was brewing, she woke to speak of darkened skies. The elders welcomed her gift, yet they feared it too, for prophecy always brings a door to new burdens. Stranger still were the nights when Elise crept from the village to the edges of the forest, drawn by something she could neither name nor resist. Among lichen-swathed oaks, she stood among the carved faces of old statues, tasting the hush of that ancient place. In those moments, she felt threads of possibility tug at her mind, as if 1,000 voices, long dormant, pressed against the walls of her thoughts. With her slender fingers, she traced the mossy glyphs on the old standing stones, marvelling at their unknown meaning. Gradually, she understood that her gift was only an echo of deeper magic. Among her people, few truly recalled the old days when giants roamed the land. Some believed them spurned gods or monstrous inhabitants of an age lost to swirling mist. Others claimed the giants remained among them in hidden caverns, lulled into slumber by spells older than the carved stone circles. Elise, in her dawn visions, saw flickers of mighty shapes nestled beneath the hills. Mountains moved as they snored. Valleys quaked with their breath. One vision showed her how these giants dreamed, and how their dreams shaped the course of rivers, the rise of forests, and the fates of mortal folk. When Elise was approached by the village's council of elders in her 20th year, she stood before them in the torchlit circle. They had heard of a famine looming from the western shores, a famine that no prayers to the gods seemed able to avert. The clan's prophet man, once revered for his accurate glimpses, had recently passed away. With hunger already haunting the edges of the fields, the elders demanded that Elise read the tapestry of the future and tell them what must be done. She closed her eyes and whispered the incantations the old prophet had taught her. At first, she saw only shapes of uncertain colour, fragments of hillsides collapsing, fires raging beyond the horizon. It was not enough, too vague. The villagers waited anxiously for some prophecy of hope, but Ares opened her eyes and said that her vision was incomplete. "I need more," she said. "The future is hidden behind deeper veils. I must reach beyond mortal dreaming." A hush fell, and the elders exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what she meant. The old law spoke of a ritual that could siphon the dreams of the giants. But that practice had been taboo since the days when it was blamed for war between mortals and the mountainous colossi. To disturb the giant slumber was to invite swirling chaos, or so the stories said. But Elise persisted in her plea. "If you wish me to see what will come, let me do what must be done. The giants hold ancient knowledge in their dreaming. Let me weave that into our prophecy." The eldest of the council, a stooped woman named Brioc, had lived through many seasons and lost 2 children to famine years before. She understood that desperate times called for desperate measures. Placing a trembling hand on Elise's shoulder, Brioc said, "We will give you what you need, but heed this warning. The cost of giants' dreams can be mighty. Tread lightly should you disturb them." That very evening, Elise purified herself. She fasted, drinking only from a sacred spring and reciting chants to align her spirit with the realm of hidden truths. The next morning, she left the village with a small retinue of supporters who bore no illusions about the journey's danger. They followed her across rolling moors where the wind howled like grieving spirits, then through an evergreen forest that spread its ancient boughs overhead. After several days of travel, they came upon a valley ringed by tall, jagged mountains. Legend called this the Circle of Sleeping Titans. With careful steps and whispered words, Ailís led her companions into the heart of the valley. A faint hum seemed to rise from the ground itself, coaxing an uneasy quiver in their stomachs. Animal bones lay scattered around, bleached white. Few dared to trespass here, and even fewer returned. At the center of the valley, a wide clearing opened. There, half buried in the soil, rose the massive shapes of 3 sleeping giants. Their bodies resembled rocky hills, their features craggy, as if carved from ancient stone. Moss grew across their arms and faces, and the heavy smell of damp earth and decay clung to the air. No chest rose and fell in breath, but Ailís sensed the steady pulse of life in them. The giants' dreams ebbed and flowed, an ethereal current swirling just beyond mortal perception. Ailís bid her companions to remain at the periphery, minds calm and hearts steady. She approached the closest giant's head, its granite-like brow half hidden in a nest of tangled roots. She bowed low, speaking an archaic incantation. Gently, she placed her palm on the giant's temple. Her breath caught in her throat. An immense force of dreaming consciousness rushed up to meet her, a wave of images colliding in her mind. The air around her crackled with a tingling energy. Her first task was to steady herself. She let her breath slow, and through the labyrinth of flickers, ancient battles, storms that raged across now vanished continents, lovers parted by cyclopean walls of stone, the shape of tomorrow began to form. Cautiously, she started to pull at the edges of those dreams, siphoning the knowledge into her own mind. Here, the images coalesced around a single terrifying revelation. A monstrous darkness spread across the land. Crops shriveled black, seas turned violent, and entire tribes disappeared. Ailís felt that it was no petty famine they faced, but a greater cataclysm. The giant's dream offered glimpses of how nature tore itself apart under that shadow's influence, leaving barren wastes where once meadows thrived. Then, as she probed deeper, she felt an echo of a voice. It told her there existed a weaving of threads, a tapestry of hope. If she proved herself worthy of weaving it, her mind burned with the visions, and she drew back, gasping. The giant's brow twitched, though its eyelids remained closed. The contact was broken, but her head reeled from the raw enormity of the dream. She felt as though she could scarcely contain the images, as if they might spill from her and reshape the waking world in chaotic ways. Dizzy, nauseous, yet determined, Ailís thanked the slumbering colossus. Then, with trembling steps, she made her way back to the circle where her companions stood waiting. Their eyes shone with a mixture of awe and dread. They returned to the village as quickly as possible, mindful of the swirling storm clouds that seemed to gather on the horizon. When they arrived, Ailís gave no immediate explanation. Instead, she locked herself away in the old prophet's hut. There, with the door barred, she pored through scrolls of archaic script. Some were written in a cryptic mix of ogham and pictorial glyphs, describing a great shroud that would devour hearts if left unchecked. For 3 nights, she did not emerge, save to fetch small amounts of water. Through chants and symbols ground into chalk dust, Ailís sought to shape the swirling visions into a coherent prophecy. She needed clarity, and not just primal fears. Finally, on the 4th morning, she unlatched the door and called for the elders. They gathered in her hut, breath held tight. Ailís began her tale of what she had seen. Her speech was soft at first, like the hush of wind through tall grass. But then it gathered force. She spoke of a creeping darkness spreading from the western horizon, emanating from a place once known for star-crossed stones. She described how the farmland would turn fallow, how the seas would churn with black foam, and how beasts would leave the forests in a panic, as if fleeing from a predator beyond mortal comprehension. When the gloom settled upon the land, huts would rot in days, and sickness would spread from clan to clan. Even strong men and women lost hope. The shadow was no mortal army, but an entity or force that fed on despair. The prophecy was dire, yet Airlis saw a thread of potential hope. In the giant's dream, she had been shown a tapestry, an interwoven pattern that reached across mountains and seas. It suggested that if the tribes could unite under a shared cause, they might harness the energy of a grand ritual to purge the coming plague. But the pattern was complex and recognized no single source of power. It required hearts bound by trust, not just the potent magic of one gifted individual. The elders listened, shaking their heads. Uniting the tribes was no small feat. Wars had been fought over petty disputes in past years. Alliances rarely lasted long, yet Airlis insisted it was their only chance. Her words found refuge in Brioc's heart first. Rising from her seat, the old woman slammed her staff on the earthen floor, scattering dusk motes that shone in the torchlight. "She has spoken the truth," said Brioc, voice quavering with conviction. "If we ignore this prophecy, we do so at our peril." Dawn was still pale in the sky when runners were dispatched to neighboring settlements. Their mission was to gather chieftains from near and far for a convocation unlike any in living memory. As the weeks passed, clan leaders trickled in with wary eyes. They came draped in furs, wearing torque necklaces of twisted bronze, and they brought their retinues of armed warriors. The meeting place was a ring of great standing stones by a river that churned from the autumn rains. On the appointed day, the congregation formed a broad circle. Airlis stood in the centre, flanked by Brioc and a handful of elders from her own village. Also present were the high druids from other lands, their long beards braided with symbols of the old gods. Airlis recited the prophecy gleaned from the giant. Some looked unconvinced. Some stared at her with open fear. A few muttered about claims of old magic, thought best left buried. But as she spoke, a hush grew. She told them how she had touched the mind of a giant, how she had witnessed a wave of darkness that would consume their world. She urged unity. Bands of warriors, druids, and seers alike must combine their strengths in a single purpose. A riot of contention erupted. Some chieftains demanded proof. Others balked at placing their trust in a single seer's words. The circle threatened to devolve into chaos until a druid from a distant coast stepped forward. He wore sea-worn shells on his robe and carried a staff carved with swirling knots. He recounted how, in the past spring, strange storms churned up fish rotted with an oily blackness upon the tide. Another chief nodded, remarking that in his territory, entire flocks of birds had vanished overnight, leaving only droppings of strange, dark residue. The more they shared their scattered omens, the clearer it became that something was indeed amiss. Bolstered by this corroboration, Airlis received tentative agreement. The tribes would unite for a grand ritual at the Circle of Standing Stones. Even so, they worried. Such magic had not been attempted since tales told of the days when giants walked the plains in full wakefulness. It was said that to attempt ritual on so grand a scale could crack the boundaries separating mortal dreams from primordial chaos. Undeterred, Airlis knelt on the grass, whispering a silent plea. "Give me the strength to weave these threads of fate. Let me guide them as the giant's dream has shown." In the weeks that followed, the tribes worked side by side. They built a lavish, ceremonial space, weaving bright cloth between the stones, anchoring them with iron stakes and tokens of each clan's sacred animals. Drummers arrived with hide-bound percussion, while harpists tuned their strings to plaintive chords that echoed across the moors. Druids flocked in from hidden groves, bringing incense and runic symbols to lay on altars at each cardinal direction. The deep sense of shared purpose began to overshadow old feuds. On the morning of the grand ritual, Airlis prepared in solitude. She wrapped herself in a cloak embroidered with Celtic knots, each knot representing a bond formed among the tribes. A small circle of trusted druids anointed her with oils of oak and rowan, chanting blessings for wisdom, courage, and clarity of vision. Then the sun rose, painting the stones in golden light as hundreds gathered in silent ranks. Eris stood by the central altar, carved with swirling designs. She raised her arms. Drummers thrummed a low rhythm, a pulse that resonated in chest cavities and set hearts pounding in unison. A hush fell, and Eris's voice rose on the wind. Giants of old, awaken not your bodies but your dreaming. We call upon you now to protect this land we share, to guide us in forging a shield against the darkness. Her chant built in intensity, weaving Gaelic syllables into a melodic incantation that soared and dove like a hunting hawk. The gathered druids formed concentric circles around her, echoing her chant. Energy crackled, and a faint, swirling mist formed at the edges of the stone circle. Candle flames danced wildly, though no wind stirred. Within that swirl, Eris felt the tether to the giant's dream realms. Her fingertips prickled with the memory of placing her hand on the giant's brow. The dream's power flickered into being, as if bridging realms. Visions streamed across her senses once more, towering shapes, primeval forests, colossi forging mountains with each footstep. She glimpsed threads of possibility weaving into a grand design. At that moment, she sensed a horrifying presence lurking at the edges. The darkness felt living, hungry, aware. It lunged at the boundary of the ritual space, the illusions of fanged shadows creeping along the edges of the circle. A collective shudder gripped the onlookers. Still, Eris maintained her focus, chanting the pattern of unity from the giant's dream. She guided the druid's energies, forging an umbral tapestry that shimmered with silver threads. The shimmering shape expanded outward, forming a dome of intangible light overhead. Looming shapes of swirling black collided with the dome, repelled in a flash of pale blue sparks. The watchers gasped. They could see the darkness, a swirling thing of madness just beyond the circle. It battered the protective dome, searching for a breach. Then the strain began. Whether from the immensity of the unity spell or from the relentless assault of the dark force, Eris felt her strength ebb. Blood pounded in her ears. Her knees threatened to buckle. Sweat drenched her brow, and her eyes stung. She could sense the giant's dream presence behind her, as if one of them called her name. Summoning her last reserves, she planted her staff in the soil and cried, "By the vow we have made, and the giants who slumber beneath our feet, let all be strengthened." The circle flared brightly. A coronet of ghostly flames licked the night sky, dispelling the day's last light. The chieftains, the druids, and all assembled felt an internal surge, a resonance as if some chord deep within them had been struck. In that moment, old grudges melted. They raised their voices in unison, chanting the same Gaelic words that Eris intoned. The dome of light burned with renewed brilliance. Tendrils of darkness recoiled. An unearthly shriek tore through the air and the ground shook underfoot. As quickly as it had risen, the swirl of darkness retreated, slipping back beyond the mortal plane. Clouds overhead parted, revealing a cold, starry sky. For several heartbeats, no one dared speak. Then a trembling release flooded the gathering, a rush of triumph and relief. Tears wet many cheeks, and weapons clattered to the ground as warriors sank to their knees. Eris, drained of all strength, collapsed onto the grass. Braiach hurried to her side, gently cradling her head. When Eris opened her eyes, she found herself back in the old prophet's hut, a single candle flickering. Braiach hovered nearby with a steaming cup. The older woman offered a weary smile. "Your fever broke last night. Rest, child, all is well." Eris blinked, disoriented, her memories drifting like scattered leaves. Gradually the ceremony came back to her, the chanting, the sight of swirling gloom slamming into their protective dome, and the giants stirring in snatches of dream. She tried to speak, but her mouth felt full of cotton. Braiach hushed her. "We succeeded. The tribes stand united. The land seems to be healing. The fields are no longer withering, and the animals are returning. But the power you wielded nearly consumed you." "We almost lost you, dear girl." Over the following days, Airless recovered her strength while word spread that the famine had miraculously lifted. The soil, once choked with rot, sprouted green shoots. Streams ran clear, fish filled the nets, and the gloom that haunted the edges of the sky receded like a bad dream. The tribes, now linked by a common purpose, established a council to remain vigilant. Diplomatic visits were exchanged, alliances were forged and solidified. Though many a cynic insisted old feuds might eventually re-emerge, for now at least, a sense of unity had taken hold. When Airless finally stepped outside, she was met with cheers. Villagers crowded around to thank her, some offering flowers, others their heartfelt gratitude. She accepted each gesture with humble grace. It was not a single effort, after all, but the combined will of many that had prevailed. Still, she could not help remembering the Titan's dream. She harbored a lingering worry. The darkness had only been beaten back, not utterly destroyed. One day, it might gather strength again. The price of freedom, she recognized, would be eternal vigilance. In the coming weeks, as her body mended, Airless's mind turned again to the giants. Their dreams contained more secrets, she was certain. The next crisis might not be the same as the last. The land was beautiful but fragile, vulnerable to storms both earthly and ethereal. She told Brock of her intention to return to the circle of sleeping titans to give thanks and ensure that their rest remained undisturbed. When she was strong enough, she set off on the well-worn path, walking alone this time, carrying little more than her staff and a satchel of offerings. She arrived before dusk, standing once again in the silent valley. The hum in the ground still tickled her senses, quieter now, less foreboding. Each giant lay as she remembered, embedded in the mellow earth, eyes closed in ancient slumber. She approached the smallest of the three with slow reverence, bearing a scented bundle of sacred herbs tied together with braided knots. Kneeling beside an outstretched arm the size of her cottage, Airless lit the small bundle. The fragrant smoke curled upward in delicate spirals. "Thank you," she whispered. She let her palm rest lightly on the giant's moss-softened cheek. This time, she did not siphon their dreams. Instead, she released a thread of her own, a gentle swirl of gratitude and peace. In that moment, she felt a faint, comforting presence brush back against her mind. Not words, but an emotion that spoke of acceptance. She had proven that mortals of this world could reach across the veil that separated them from beings of such immense power. Perhaps, with balanced respect, the future might remain bright, or at least less dark than it could have been. In rising to leave, Airless saw a faint flicker beneath the giant's eyelids. Even in slumber, they remained watchful. She wondered whether the giants now dreamed of the unity they had helped bring about. Tribes, once divided, now standing side by side. She hoped that was so. The seer's job, after all, was not simply to foresee catastrophe, but to guide her people to avoid it. In forging a bond with the giants dreaming, Airless realized she had found a new path, one of shared stewardship for the land and all who dwelled upon it. She walked away from the valley with measured, unhurried steps. The sun was dipping lower, streaking the sky with hues of russet and gold. Each breath of evening air felt invigorating. Where once she might have worried that returning to the mortal realm meant leaving the giant's power behind, now she understood that she carried a fragment of it within her. The knowledge gleaned from the dream realm had altered her. She felt it in the subtle shift of her perception. She sensed the heartbeat of the earth, the silent conversation of the trees, and the hidden rustle of fey wings in the underbrush. Over time, songs spread through the villages about the seer who walked among sleeping giants to avert a catastrophe. Generations to come would retell how the tribe stood together under the light of a grand incantation to push back an ancient darkness. Children listening to those tales would shiver at the mention of monstrous shadows battering at a protective dome. They would feel wonder at the mention of the giant's dream and the seer who dared enter it. For her part, Elise remained grounded in humble realities. The day after her return, she rolled up her sleeves to help harvest the newly revived fields, hauling baskets of grain alongside her neighbours. She schooled younger aspirants who showed a talent for communion with spirits and the unseen world, teaching them to respect the natural order and to always weigh the cost of the knowledge they sought. Of the giant's dreams, she had learned that magic cannot be wielded lightly lest it imbalance the fragile tapestry that sustains all life. At night, Early sometimes dreamed of the giants. She would see their great stone eyelids quiver, sense the hum of ancient breath, and watch as cosmic shapes of swirling energies traced the boundaries between worlds. She woke with the understanding that she was but one strand in the grand loom of fate, and that her role was no more or less important than that of others. There were many tasks to be done, many hearts to unify, and many stories yet to be shaped. Thus, the land found its brief peace thanks to a fragile alliance forged by faith and guided by a seer's courage. Whether ages hence would heed the reminder remained an open question. Yet, so long as the giants dreamed in their hidden valley, and so long as there were those courageous enough to listen to those dreams, hope remained carved into the bedrock of the world. And Erlis understood at last that the greatest prophecies were not mere warnings of doom, but living threads that bound everyone together, weaving the possibility of salvation through shared will and compassion.